Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Wheeler Centre for tonight's event. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Bunwarang people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge that Indigenous sovereignty over this land has never been ceded, which I think, among other things, makes our presence here this evening, the presence of non-Indigenous people, contingent rather than inevitable. Tonight, I hope that we're going to be thinking about and talking about ways of seeing and ways of knowing, and the first people to see, know, and comprehend this land were Bunwarang people, and are still Bunwarang people whose ways of being and seeing and knowing are still active and present upon this land. I also wish to pay my respects to any other First Nations people who may be here this evening, and in particular to elders. My name is Anwen Crawford, and it is my great pleasure and privilege to be here tonight on Bunwarang land in conversation with Teju Cole. Before I introduce Teju further, a spot of housekeeping. Our conversation is going to run for about 45 minutes, and then there will be a 15-minute Q&A. There will be ushers walking around with microphones, so you can direct your questions to those microphones, and as always, please do your best to keep your questions relevant and relatively brief so that as many people can participate as possible. After the talk, Teju will be signing books up in the back corner, and there will also be books for sale, courtesy of the excellent Metropolis Books. The audio of this event is also being live streamed, and so I would like to welcome anyone who may be listening in, wherever you may be. And so to this evening's guest. As many of you will already know, Teju Cole is a writer, critic, photographer, art historian and artist. He is the photography critic for the New York Times and the recipient of several awards and honours, including the Wyndham Campbell Prize in 2015. He is the author of 2 works of fiction, Every Day is for the Thief and Open City, a collection of essays, known and strange things. And his most recent book, Blind Spot, is both a photographic essay and, I want to say, a lyric essay, but I think even as I make these descriptions, I'm conscious of their inadequacy. One of the things that I find most valuable in Teju's work is the way in which it resists genre, resists easy labeling, and I want to say resists paraphrase. I think that Teju's work has a great integrity, and that part of that integrity is that the work is complete unto itself. But again, even as I say that, I think Teju's work has a rare completeness and a rare coherence as a long-term project, a multifaceted, multidisciplinary long-term project. I want to complicate this further by adding that part of his work's completeness and integrity, as I find it, part of its moral integrity, is the admission of doubt. And sometimes those doubts are grave, and sometimes they are great. And because of those doubts, Teju's work is never dogmatic and never self-satisfied. And because in his work he leaves everything open to question, I find that within his work everything is still at stake. Will you please join me in welcoming Teju Cole?
Thank you very much for that introduction. Very moved by it. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Get you somebody who can introduce you like that. I recommend it. It feels so good. Could we raise the house lights just a little bit?
Yes, it's rather...
Just a touch? It's impossible. What? We can turn them on or off. Oh, really? It's very dramatic?
It's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's a little...
because I can't see who I'm talking to, and it's a different conversation. You know what? Yeah, fuck it. Let's turn them on.
Let's be Brechtian about this.
Yeah. So that we're all here. Yeah, is that fine by you?
Yeah. Yay!
Yeah.
Here we go. Excellent.
That was it? Okay. Oh, that's fine. I really thought it was going to be blinding. No, this is good. This is excellent. Because, it moves us away a little bit from sort of the black box
Yes,
effect.
absolutely.
And there's this play that we're doing up here for you. And rather, I just want to know that you're in the room. Thank you very, very much for coming. It's great to be back in Melbourne. Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, pleasure.
There are so many ways to begin, and I know that once we strike out upon one beginning, it will take us to certain places, and we won't be able to backtrack.
It's all right. We can do montage. We can just stop in the middle of a thought and go back to anything else.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, let me begin then with a phrase that's been running through my head all day, and I've appropriated this phrase, this question from Roland Barthes, from his wonderful book, Camera Lucida, which is one of the great works on photography. And I'm going to preserve his words, or rather preserve the English translation of his words, which may make the question sound as if it's adjacent to you, or is perhaps directed at me, but I think that ambiguity might be useful. And his question is, what does my body know of photography?
I think for Barthes, one of the things that haunted that book was looking at, was it a photograph of the emperor's
Napoleon's brother.
Brother?
Yes.
And he says, when you're looking at the photograph, he says, I'm looking at eyes that looked on the
emperor. Yes.
And so for him, photography was always this highly visceral thing. I find it an appropriate question because in a way that is less direct for writing, in photography, there's an invitation to be sympathetic viscerally with what has happened. When you look at a photo, somebody's body was in a place, in a certain attitude and an action, making an image of something. And it has a point of view.
Yes.
And it's almost a testimony of having been in a place, so that if there's something that's shot from a low angle, it is asking a kind of imagination, a sympathetic imagination, to imagine your body in that low angle. If something's taken from a height, or if something is a confrontation with another person. A photo is a photo, but a photo is almost also an invitation to do a kind of imitative embodiment. So that has always been the attraction of it for me, that photography is halfway between writing and performance art. In performance art, your body's on the stage, is really doing the action. In writing, you might as well be a brain in a vat, really. But with photography, the body's always implied. So.
And it's so interesting that you go to this notion of empathetic embodiment and, in a sense, the chance for the viewer to put themselves in the bodily place of the photographer, because it's one reaction that I have very strongly to your work is not necessarily to want to see what you saw or see through your eyes, but I find myself, partly because of the way that you photograph things which are often only partially visible or maybe obstructed in some way, that I experience a kind of spatial disorientation, and I want to orientate myself in the position that you were in when you took the photograph.
I think because of my inherent outsiderishness to intellectual labor, I'm just a dude from Nigeria, libraries are not full of books by people like me. And so my participation in intellectual activity was already sort of contingent in that sense. But then you come to intellectual labor and you realize that most of the voicing in intellectual labor is objective. I am man, I have come with my opinion, and this is the final word on this thing, right? And now you have to say, well, what's my relationship to that? Is that the kind of intellectual labor I have to do? And so right from the beginning, I've been very strongly drawn to subjective modes of production. And so that when photography became more and more an important part of my practice, a big part of the attraction was the ability to be, the inescapability of subjectivity in that, you know. Somebody was there and saw it in this particular way. So drawing out those kinds of sympathies, which I try to have present in all my work, all my writing, all my written work. Photography just allowed me to intensify that voice. This is not the final answer. This is not the only possible way of doing this. This is not the way somebody else might do this. But this is valuable because I was here on such and such a date. I thought about it in this way. This is the street corner I stopped at. This is how hot it was. My shoulders were tired. This is the particular slice of history I thought about. I'm presenting it to you to almost capture something that would otherwise be gone.
Yes.
You know, the opposite of the municipal tour guide.
Yes.
Who gives the standard version, you know.
Yeah.
I'm the anti-tour guide. you know, I give the radically personal version that often, you know, once you read it, you're like, I never need to go to that place. It sounds pretty horrible. So.
It's also, is part of that subjectivity, this notion of, and this occurs in one of your essays in Known and Strange Things, where you talk about photographies. I've written it down, and again, I don't wish to paraphrase, so I should actually quote. One of the difficulties of photography is that it is much better at being explicit than at being reticent. And yet I feel that reticence is not just an aesthetic quality, but an ethical quality that your work has.
I mean, I think if I follow up on that thought, I would just say that it's difficult and then it's worth wrestling with. You don't give up on it, you know. I don't think it comes very naturally to photography to not say exactly what it means, you know, a lot of the photography we see. And in fact, it's because photography is so good at sending across a simple message that it dominates advertising, right? And any average magazine is full of amazing photography, technically speaking, and semantically quite narrow and flat. So how do you force photography to do both less and more?
And more.
Is an interesting question, especially since you know that because of the way people's eyes are trained in photography, they will find those efforts boring, obviously, because they're like, why is this interesting? And that's an interesting space to sit in together and say, well, yes, why is this interesting? You know, I mean, it's just boring. It's just a piece of trash on the road, you know. It's an interesting ethical challenge. How do you push past the bullshit factor, where people are skeptical of saying, it doesn't look as if that was very hard to do. So you're on some level, you've got to be kidding. And then hopefully then they break through that barrier into something that says, it's interesting how this makes me sit with my thoughts, or how it affects my breathing, or it alters my relationship to what I thought of as received facts, in a way that, you know, I like to flip through L or GQ. I do. I mean, there's interesting things to see, but these are not the things that are going to console me in the long run.
Yes.
You know, and there's some very fine photography in those magazines.
There is, yeah. Should we look at a photograph?
Vogue
perhaps?
Italia.
Oh,
Vogue
yeah.
Italia, anyone?
Yeah.
Vogue Italia is good.
One of the things
I think maybe better than Vogue USA.
Don't let Anna Wintour hear you say that. Shall we look at a photograph, perhaps?
Emoji.
Emoji.
Yes, let's look at some photos. Yeah.
Let's look at a photo that may do less and more. If I get the button correct. Here we go. So this is one of the photographs in your book, Blind Spot. And I will get you to read this passage. But should we look at the photograph first, or would you prefer to consider both things together?
Yeah, we can look at the photo because there's something about this picture which I took in 2014, where if even for myself, both now and then, when I took the picture and I had the film processed, I thought that this is so me. Like this picture is very, very, very me.
It's on brand. Teju
Very
brand.
on brand. Very on brand. And I think that could be put into words. I mean, it's in Switzerland. I go to Switzerland a lot, and I really enjoy being there. And there's a kind of coolness of affect about the landscape and the cityscape in Switzerland that answers something in me. It's up at the top of a mountain, so that's very me. And it's got like a bunch of signs that are not
giving you information.
That are not, yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like that's very, very me. It's like, it's suggesting that there's meaning there. But what's the meaning?
We can figure this out.
Yeah. So it becomes a matrix. It becomes a space in which I can do some thinking. So that's why I liked it. And I had done a bit of hiking to get up there, so I was very happy to encounter it.
You know, I had a funny experience this afternoon when I looked at this photo again and realized that I'd completely misremembered it, because in my memory the photograph included fog. And
no
fog.
No fog.
I don't know where the fog came from.
That's interesting. There was fog that day, but not at this moment. Yeah, I have, in fact, some very dramatically foggy photos looking in another direction, but not in this picture. Each pairing in this book, there's 150 images and 150 texts, and it's usually this kind of pairing. Text on the left and image on the right. And each pairing is entitled with the name of a place. And on like that. Gemi Pass. In 1891, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson crossed the Gemi Pass, more than 2,000 meters above sea level, on the way to Holmes's fateful meeting with Professor Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls. It was up here, having narrowly escaped a fatal fall, that James Baldwin figured out what to call the novel he was working on, Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Thank you. So, a few things come to mind for me in the relationship between this photograph and the text. The figure of Sherlock Holmes, I think, immediately brings to mind, for me, photography's historical relationship with ideas of evidence, police work, surveillance, the whole kind of criminal apparatus of the state, criminalizing apparatus, I should say. And yet, partly because of the fact that the signs are turned around, this photograph also seems to be refusing that relationship with the indexical. And then there's Baldwin, who introduces a prophetic voice. So these two things are perhaps in some kind of tension with each other, in relationship with each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, having the signs pointing is almost quite literally a crossroads.
Yes.
Right, and both of these anecdotes, which I've put right next to each other. When I say montage, I'm thinking about the way it's developed in Russian filmmaking, right? Especially like Tarkovsky. The idea behind montage is when you have a film sequence set right next to... Now, film is a physical form. You cut with scissors, and you can just put something right next to another thing. And you can make that thing that you put there 3 seconds long, and then it can be 10 minutes of this and 10 minutes of this. But montage is when you put two things that are not obviously related to each other right next to each other, so that there's a kind of psychological charge in the juxtaposition. And so the montage of Sherlock Holmes' fictional character from a book, 19th century, with James Baldwin, real life character, 1950s. But for me, the charge in there is that both of them were at fateful points. Sherlock Holmes, who didn't exist, literally walked here on his way to the encounter that would be fatal to him, depending on, if he really died there or not. And James Baldwin is here, trying to escape from America, which is killing him psychologically. And he almost falls off the mountain right here. He almost plunges to his death. And then that connects him to something that was already submerged. Go tell it on the mountain, a gospel song. And then he uses that to title a novel. So for sure, the central conceit of this book and probably all my work is that places retain traces of the things that happened in them, and that there's greater or lesser accessibility to that. That places can speak to us, that they can. There's a kind of accessible radiation of past events, that the past is never really past. And so I like to go to seemingly unforthcoming sort of places and ask them to speak in some way, and sometimes they do.
A crossroads too implies obviously having to make some kind of a choice, having to perhaps take some kind of a leap of faith in something that you are not sure about, that you're not confident in, maybe.
Yeah, well, this is a book about blindness.
Yes.
The background of the book is that I had eye trouble in 2011. I temporarily went blind in my left eye. And then, a couple of days later, it was fine. But there was this complicated process of getting a diagnosis. Would it come back? And it will come back, and so on. I had some laser surgery to repair damage. And the illness, the condition was called papillophlebitis. It was blood vessels on the retina exploding. Also known as big blind spot syndrome, which for an ordinary civilian is like, oh, that's a terrible thing to have happen. Nobody wants to be sick. But for a writer, it's, tell me more. Big blind spot, huh?
Metaphorically useful.
Really just perfectly dovetailed with what was already an obsession in my own work, with looking at the limits of what we can see. So, but an important secondary theme in the book was of vulnerability of the body in general. So in many places I talk about walking and trouble walking, and so almost falling, and people in dreams falling from a great height, and all of that stuff. So any single image and its text is also part of the elaborate patterning of maybe a group of 5 themes that I try to stitch together in quite a novelistic way. It's not a novel, but this is a book about flight, about blindness, about walking. It's about the Bible and about the Iliad. And I think if you take those 5 things, they show up in this sort of weave.
Yes.
And angels and Hermes show up a lot too.
Angels do come up.
Yeah.
They do.
Lots of angels. Yeah. Angels, yeah. Angels are kind of ridiculous. The muscles on the back of a human being are not substantial enough to operate wings of that size. They are anatomically implausible, angels. You would have to have a back like Thor or something. And most angels don't. They're very gender bendy and lithe. And meanwhile, this huge... So, even as a kid, I was like, those wings aren't going to work. And yet, as I get older, I'm more and more interested in the go-betweens and the metaphorical meaning and the consolation of the idea of messengers. And so I'm interested in angel function.
Yes, intermediaries.
Intermediaries, absolutely. Eshu, the Yoruba god, and Hermes, the Greek one, and on like that. And therefore, all intermediaries, all straddlers, all who inhabit some form of neither here nor there are interesting to me. And they are also kinds of angels, I think.
Should we look at another image?
Yeah, let's do it.
This one, well...
Yeah, it's very theological. It's also very sexual. Okay.
Yes, would you like to read?
Sure. Vanze. There was a construction project for a few weeks outside my room. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Thomas answered him, My Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. 6 miles from Vanze is Sanssouci in Potsdam. When I made this photograph in Vanze, I did not know that Caravaggio's The Incredulity of St. Thomas was in Sanssouci. Has there been a more intense or more erotic demonstration of the sense of touch than in Caravaggio's painting? The split in Thomas's shirt is the same size and shape as the wound in the side of Christ. Both are eyes that short-circuit vision. Christ advises Thomas to surrender the sensual faculty in favor of the cognitive. But his hand, guiding Thomas's hand, says something different. Caravaggio, as usual, goes to that dark core where action splits from intention. I was based in Vanze for the summer and spent some of my time going to distant places in search of paintings by Caravaggio, to Madrid, Venice, Basel. I miss the Caravaggio right next door.
Did you know when you made this photo, well, you say in your text that you didn't know that the Caravaggio was right there.
Yeah.
But did you know when you made it, I find it uncanny how that shape in the photograph corresponds
to the shape in the painting just a few miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is a God who looks over photographers, and she can be quite compassionate. Or, if you want to be less spiritual about it, it becomes a question of saying, I'm looking through the archives of the images I took over a few years while I'm making this book, and I have maybe 5,000 or 7,000 negatives, because I decided that it doesn't have to be film all the time. I decided this book was going to be only film photographs. It is, a photo like this is actually not going to work as well with digital. There's just, the highlights are just too challenging, and digital would probably blow them out. But out of, let's say, 5,000 negatives, you want to pick 150 pictures that all participate in telling of this story about the limits of vision. You're not picking the 150 best pictures. It's not the greatest hits. It's about going through the archive and just, kind of hoping and praying and finding the things that invite this language and this thinking. And then every now and again, you're just going to find a story that locks in perfectly and that just really does that work. for you. But I do have to say that I think part of the reason that works is because in the process of taking the pictures, you're already going around in a state of heightened sensitivity and sort of going around the world looking for what's yours. You know, you always have the camera with you. What's yours is yours. And when you see something that might belong to you, you break off any conversation you're having, whatever you're doing. You get out of the car if you have to. You know, you lose track of your friends, and you make sure that you're present to what might turn out to be yours. So I'm a difficult person to walk down the street with. I get very distracted by what to most other people seems fairly nothing-ish.
Do you know are you a photographer who knows the photograph before you look through the lens, or do you have to?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
No. It's a game of millimeters. And it's a game of, in this particular instance, I used to take sort of decisive moment type of pictures, you know, the pictures that win World Press Photo, that sort of thing. Very dynamic and composed in a very impressive way with many human bodies that have just locked into an ideal formation, right? You know the pictures I'm talking about. And I used to take some of those pictures and, you know, I had a few good ones. This feels more difficult to me because here what you're looking for is some kind of tension that cannot easily be articulated. It's visual, it is visceral, but it's visual, it's cognitive as well, and finally it's psychological. When it works, you know. It's like what the Supreme Court Justice said about pornography. I can't define it.
I know it
but when I see it, I know it, you know. And when I have a picture that has just that tension, that pain, or that feeling of the ordinary properly attended to, I know it when I see it. But I don't know it before I put the camera to my eye, and I don't even know it when I hit the shutter. It's guesswork at best. There's something about when the print comes out. Like, I really thought that was going to work, but somehow it didn't work. For example, this would not work without that brick up there.
Precisely.
Right?
The brick is...
I'm taking the photo because of the gash, but then it's the brick that gives me the balance I need somehow.
Yes.
It's a counterweight. It's a presence that is countering the absence of the gash.
I agree, partly because the brick makes me think of what came before and what will come after the photograph in terms of whoever put the brick there and who may take it away again.
That's right. It's a construction site.
Yes.
In the rain. But, it also sort of takes us back to William Carlos Williams. You know, so much depends on a wheelbarrow in the rain.
Yes.
Who knows?
The red wheelbarrow.
A red wheelbarrow in the rain.
rain.
You know, flecked with something. Was there chickens in that poem as well? Okay. English PhD students. Does anybody know? Show of hand. Does anybody know the Carlos Williams? Yes, please project. Back of the room. So much depends. So much depends on the red wheelbarrow glazed with rain.
Water.
So much depends on the red wheelbarrow glazed with rainwater beside the white chickens. Thank you very much. That's just the kind of audience I roll with. Thank you. All right.
That was excellent.
Yeah.
Doubt, there is, to me, both in this photograph and in the text that accompanies it, a puzzling over of doubt, both because
I'm not sure we should talk about doubt.
Where will that take us?
Yeah. Okay, go on. Sorry.
No, go ahead. In terms of the photograph, because, and this is something that you do often in your photographs, is to take a photograph of something which is obscured by something else.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure what I'm seeing.
Mm.
And then there is, of course, the text and this moment of doubt between Thomas and Christ. Seeing is believing, or is it believing is seeing?
Right. So Christ says, well, if you believe, then you'll see. And,
Yes.
And Thomas said, well, I wanted to see it first, and I wanted to touch it and be sure. And then there's I want to see Caravaggio paintings, and I'm going all over the place. And then I miss
You
this
miss the one.
Right. So there's...
And that's a blind spot?
And that's a blind spot, literally, there, right? What's right there? What you could have seen if you had gone about it the right way. Yeah, not being sure is just so. It's just so valuable, and I think it's especially important when we're using the language of the intellectual practices that we've been sort of trained in, because again, they very much tend to be spaces of assertion and certainty, and just trying to keep putting doubt inside that and just saying, I want to read this way, I want to think about it this way, but I'm actually not sure, and not being sure of it is where I want to be with it. You know, I thought my eyes were fine, and then they were not. I used to be quite a devout Christian, and I thought I was sure what life meant and how things assorted themselves. And, it turns out I was mistaken in some very fundamental assumptions about that, such as, what about other people who are not, who are not Christian? And nevertheless, of course, we need verities. We need things to hold on to so that we're not, being shaken about by every small breeze, right? We need things to hold on to that we can be fierce about, that can allow us to preserve our own lives and defend other people. But even our certainties, I think, ought to, in some sense, be contingent, On the macro-political level, a certainty has so often just been so disastrous and so murderous, particularly certainty about who doesn't belong, who's outside our circle, who is not invited to have human fellowship with us. So I try to embed it into my practice in as many different ways. So it just basically becomes variations on the theme of unsureness. Pretty much every book, every project becomes, which is why, big blind spot syndrome was a bit obvious. I just, like, sometimes the universe just wants to fuck with you, Like, you're interested in the limitations of vision? Have some limitations of vision. So, yeah.
There's also, and I'm going to go to the next image, but continuing this train of thought around doubt and uncertainty, one of the things which is very important to this book is is dreams and dream states.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there is something about this photograph that's very of that state to me.
Absolutely.
Partly because, it has a lot for me to do with the rather merciless quality of the light.
Yeah. Well, it's flat.
Yes.
And so the image, it's flat, it's rather uninflected, it shows what it shows. If you stare at those columns, too long, the perspective starts to mess with you. You're like, wait, are they going in that direction? Or are they going in this direction? You know, I mean, it has a postcard quality also. So one of the things I play with in the book is pictures of things that look as though they're pictures of things, you know. This could be a picture of a postcard, or it could be the picture of the actual site itself. There's a sort of picture-in-pictures tension that I'm exploring. It could also be a picture I took in 2015, or it could be a picture from, 1915, made with an antique colorization process or something. I mean, this is Baalbek, just a few miles from the Syrian border in northern Lebanon. And so at the moment I'm also there, I'm thinking about those things as well.
Well, this takes us back in some ways to what you raised before, this notion of the macro-political and the murderous qualities of certainty.
Yeah, for sure. While the physical evidence around us is that all of this stuff is going to come out in the wash. I mean, this is a Roman temple in what is now Lebanon. It's a Roman temple. I think it was sacralized at some point as a Christian church, and then it's like then it fell out of use. It became ruins, and everything. And then meanwhile, I don't. Yeah, I think I should.
You should read the text. Yeah.
Slightly longish, but I'll do it at a clip. Baalbek. It was strange enough getting there. The last 30 minutes of the journey from Beirut on a road running northeast along the foothills of the Anti-Lebanon range had us with the low mountains to our right. On that road, we were only a few miles away from the Syria border, at one point only 5, even when we got to Baalbek proper, just some 8 miles away. The war had spilled over in the past. There had been battles, though not right now. Tourism was down since 2011, and worse since 2015, and we were unnervingly alone for long spells as we clambered through the ruins, unsettling peace. I could not help but think, close to a war zone, all alone, and obviously foreign. This is how people get kidnapped. A man offered me a guidebook and a Hezbollah shirt. I bought the guidebook. We sat in a cafe across the street from the ruins. Will these ruins, as in Palmyra, be further ruined? Its proprietors, only customers. The sunlit apparition of a 6-columned Roman temple rose in the distance behind a tendril-choked wall, like a postcard of itself. Each village around here, the proprietor said, pointing to the mountains, has lost 20 men to ISIS. He doted on us. He was an old man. He recited poetry. We forgot to fix the prices before eating. He overcharged us 500%. Baalbek, even ruined, was pure visual rhythm, was strict ritual and orderly worship diagrammed in stone. The cult of Baal, the temple of Jupiter, the Byzantine basilica, the mosque, the massive sacred site had been perpetually overwritten. Gods had killed gods here and had in their turn been killed by other gods. In the words of Nadia Toueni, beneath each column a sleeping star burst into double novae on the peak of noon. Its language luminous, its gestures architectural. Baalbek is a gift from the world of measures.
I'm thinking about, and I'm sure you've thought about this. This is a book about, well, a book that comes out of travel.
Yeah.
And of going to many places.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to say that I mentioned some of the themes, and I mentioned like 5. I could add 2 more to that, and one is tourism, and thinking through the problem of tourism. But there are 25 countries in this book. And the other is terrorism, which is a a near homophone, depending on how many drinks you've had, you know. And yet, it is also, unfortunately, sometimes a near synonym, because there are several spots in the book where I'm close to the site of a terrorist attack or even the event of one.
Of one.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is you at the same time doing what you said earlier this evening that you do, which is to be the anti-tourist guide.
Yeah. Yeah,
but you bought the tourist guide.
I bought the tourist guide because it looked as if it was printed in like the mid-'80s, you know. I didn't read about it before going there, you know. But the tourist guide now becomes part of the ruin, you know. And tourism is interesting, this kind of infrastructure that I'm very interested in the way sites are now organized to affect your body, and the kind of the way you process through the site is determined by the tourist board. So, for example, I once did a project on Instagram where I was basically just posting sequences of photos from various sites, like the Roman Forum. Every photo was a regram that somebody had put up in the past few days. And I'll just do many of them. I'll do like 12 from random people. And each photo would be the same view of that site. From the Louvre, from the Roman Forum, from the new museum in New York City, from the Statue of Liberty, and on like that. Because I had a theory, which was very easily proved, that the site suggests what photo you should take. I called the rubric I organized, I called it affordances of terrain. In technology, we talk about the affordances of a piece of technology, which is when you make a piece of technology, there's the goal of what it is supposed to do. A phone is supposed to make phone calls, but then there are other things that it does because of the way it is. It might not have been the intention of the person who made it, but it's an affordance. It is within the range of possibilities of what that thing can do. So when Twitter was first invented, it was made for sending tweets. But because you could see other people's tweets and you wanted to share them, there was an affordance in it of just copying that other person's tweet, putting an RT colon in front of that, and calling it a retweet. You know, and after a while, then the company comes around and embraces that affordance and turns it into a feature, right? Okay. So each terrain also has things that it is suggesting to you that might have been planned or not planned, but that ends up leading to thousands of the same photo of the Pantheon, you know, because it suggests itself in a certain way. Thousands and thousands of the same photo of the Eiffel Tower because of where the stanchions are and where the guardrails are, and so you can actually only take a good shot from here. So tourism itself becomes a way of thinking about our collective space. I'm anti-tourist, but I'm also a tourist. We've all sort of done this thing of taking pictures of people who are taking pictures, right? So that becomes another tourist gesture. Thinking about tourism, making a boring picture like this, for example, also becomes a way of pushing against the spectacular.
Yes.
Right? So looking for ways to make the anti-spectacular image.
Yes.
Which sometimes means simply doing the banal image. And nevertheless trying to find a way in it to create some visual tension, you know.
Your photographs are uneventful.
They tend to be.
Yes, but I mean that as a compliment.
Thank you. I was, a couple of years ago, I was with my parents in a parking lot of a friend's house. We went to visit a sick friend. And I came out, and my father was like, what are you doing? I was taking a picture of something. It was a dumpster or something. It wasn't a dumpster. The picture contained a dumpster and a car, and a bit of a car, and, you know, some trees. Anyway, there was a picture. It was in Michigan. My father was like, so, my parents are very careful now. My father was like, I don't want to offend you, but what exactly is the photo here? And my mom was like, why are you asking? You know how your son is. You could stand there for 30 minutes and you wouldn't see what it is that he's staring at. I just advise you to let him be. So I'm 43 now, and I finally trained my parents. It's the most marvelous thing. Yeah, they no longer think I'm eccentric. They just think I'm me. It's so great.
We should open it up to some questions from the audience.
Yes, we can do that.
Hey, Teju.
Hi.
I have a couple of questions, and one's just picking up on something that you talked about, social media. And I'm fascinated to find out your insights on Twitter specifically, because I know that you temporarily retired from Twitter.
Twitter's going to get us all killed.
And it's been interesting to observe writers in recently. Zadie Smith has talked about how Twitter doesn't allow for that space to meditate and be wrong.
Right.
Salman Rushdie has left Twitter because of what he says is a very antagonistic climate. And obviously with 45 in power, Twitter has just brought on a very different dimension in communication. So I would like to get your insights on where you think Twitter's heading in terms of how we're interacting with each other and the space that it's, the echo chamber rather, that it's creating. And then secondly, completely unrelated, I want to know what your hot take is on Black Panther and, Wakanda Forever.
Thank you for the question. Wakanda forever. Yes. Okay. I'll answer the second question first. In 2 days, you're going to be able to read 4,000 words on Black Panther by me. Okay, so it's going to be...
Where?
It's going to be different. Oh, you will know.
Twitter will tell me.
Probably. When the student is ready, the master appears. So yeah, I'm really excited to have that out there because I went in some places I haven't gone before with that piece. So, and since I've written 4,000 words about it, I won't reduce it. But I highly recommend you seeing the movie so that and you can also engage with it. One thing I can say for sure is that it's a helpful movie to think with. It's a helpful thinking tool. Okay, so Twitter, I mean, the way I think about it is, it almost becomes a question about what do you think of human nature? You know, to put it very simply, are people essentially good, people essentially bad? And I would suggest maybe we shouldn't put it so simply, and we should make it an ethical commitment to foster spaces for each other where we can be our best, where we have a chance to be good to each other and to be humane to each other. And I am of the decided opinion that social media in general, but particularly Twitter, is not the place for us to be good to each other. We do need, collectively, we need reasonable restraint. This fantasy of no rules, it'll be great. Again, I'm not saying people are essentially bad. I'm just saying if you don't provide necessary restraint, then you don't give us a chance to be as good as we could be. Folks want attention. Folks want to wild out. Folks want to act in a mob. Folks want to do something and not have it be known that it's them. Human beings are very fearful. Our fundamental fear is of death and irrelevance. A little bit of relevance is always welcome, even if it means causing other people pain. So I was very active on Twitter, and then I gave it up. It was toxic. I believe very, very strongly in free speech. But I also believe in self-imposed government of the tongue. Because, who do you want to be in the world? I don't want to infringe anybody else's speech, but I also want to be in spaces where I can speak in a way that actually, adds value. I want to be in a space where thinking can happen. And so I think Zaidi is completely right. There's people very insecure. There's a wokeness arms race, of course, where the need to have the absolute right opinion means that if somebody's thinking through something, we become very, very hard on each other. So I don't think Twitter is a good space. And I already thought that, and then, Trump obviously weaponized it. And this is a new form of authoritarianism. It's not censorship by preventing people from speaking, but filling the public sphere with so much doubt and so much untruth that then people don't really believe that things can be true anymore. And that is really actually what's going to cause us the deeper long-term pain. So,
are there more questions?
Yeah, this gentleman. Okay, there, yeah, sorry. Okay.
I was thinking when you were talking about the Sherlock Holmes and the Reichenbach Falls, and later on about photography, and just now what you said about believing what's true, about the Cottesmore fairies during World War II, which were
Yes.
and during World War I rather, and I was at that, and fakeness, and Conan Doyle, who invented this great investigator, and why there was this need at that particular moment to believe that about these photographs.
I feel like that's a ghost. I feel that too about that photograph, as if that's a kind of ghost text.
What images was she referring to?
So, Arthur Conan Doyle kind of famously fell prey to this photographic hoax, the fairies.
Right. Yeah, why did he?
The need to believe in something.
I actually don't have. I mean, I don't have an easy answer for that. I think that photography has always been always had a question mark over it. Very early on, the claim was, "Wow, this is a pencil of nature. Anything you see is real." But then very quickly, people realized that things can be falsified. But yeah, I don't know about the fairy thing, other than to say that each age, each generation has its own hoaxes that to future generations just look completely ridiculous. Like, how can anyone fall for that? But, in our present day, we fall for hoaxes all the time.
And to go back to your point about Twitter and the kind of things it's producing, it's like the difference between doubt, between a productive kind of doubt and suspicion.
Right.
Paranoia.
Suspicion, paranoia, but then often not enough suspicion, not enough doubt, gullibility as well.
Credulity.
So we look at, it's clearly somebody has just like done a double exposure, kind of like, ooh, the ghost came back from the dead to tell you to, to sell the farm, and we're like, that's silly. But that every day on social media, huge numbers of people are falling for things that are sort of doctored, but that confirm their beliefs. And a very interesting reaction I noticed to it, a reaction I don't like at all, when somebody points out, by the way, that's a fake image, somebody will quickly like jump in there and say, why don't you let people have some fun? How much fun is enough fun? Because everything is then in question. You can never really believe what you see, which plays especially into the hands of people who could not win in a fair fight when it was just the truth. So the right wing definitely makes abundant use of people's inability to know what's true or not. And so we have a guy who just lies all the time. We know he's lying, his followers know he's lying, but stopped being interested in whether it's true or not, and I'm more interested in whether it feels true. That's going to be very, very, very costly.
Hi. I think, I guess I see everything, I'm thinking about W.G. Sebald and thinking about how I always see everything through the lens of W.G. Sebald. And thinking about how you talked about uncertainty. And I always find with Barth and Jeff Dyer and those guys, I always am frustrated by their certainty. And what I love about Sebald is that the uncertainty is at the forefront of what he does. And I guess when I've read your work, I've always looked at it through the lens of Sebald somehow. And there's a sense also, which you haven't talked about tonight, which I think is there in Sebald's work, which is about belonging and this sort of horrible feeling of not belonging, but also trying to belong. And then his use of photography, which I think is much different from those other writers in that he doesn't ever offer any answers, and they sort of float together, but never, and I see that somehow in Blind Spot too, in some points. You know?
Thank you. I mean, one big difference for sure is that he was not really he wasn't a photographer, but he had an extraordinary eye for the kinds of images that would work in his text. So he was a kind of a curator of images. I mean, I think the thing with Jeff Dyer and Roland Barthes is I don't really get too much certainty from them. I mean, Jeff can be a bit doctrinaire sometimes, but they're both such beautiful, such elegant writers that allows the text to be ventilated. It's different. It is really different from reading an academic piece that really seals off all the exits. And the ventilation of style, I think, is a real thing. Because a lyrical style just allows for some softness. And then you can just kind of get into a friendly argument with it. Or the corollary, allow yourself to be mesmerized by it, but then the grip that author has on you is not a hostile one. There's an implicit invitation of other ways of seeing it. So in that sense, I mean, I think there's just this whole constellation of writers, and what all these writers have in common, why they're so important to me, and I'll also add Anne Carson, I'll add Tacita Dean, who's an artist, of course John Berger, is the love they all have for fragmentary forms as well. And because in the fragment, then you can be there. It leaves space for you. It leaves space for your thoughts to follow those ellipses. And that's immensely consoling in all of them. Thanks for the question.
I think we probably have time for one more question. Yeah.
I think you just touched on it there, but before you said something about the photograph suggests the way, the site suggests the way you photograph it, and of course every photography book, has directions on how to photograph it, and that sort of leads to the so-called tourist view. Can you say something about how your way of seeing that what you look for, that's the anti-tourist view? I want to know something different to what all the books tell you to do.
That's right. I feel like I live an immensely privileged life. I get to write and make images and teach for a living and travel nice places like this. Very, very privileged because I really get to spend a lot of time thinking about how to make the work that I care about, And therefore I feel as if I have a responsibility to make that work in a way that's free. As a friend of mine, an African-American woman, whenever we're talking about some political thing and she has a different opinion or something, she'll say, we're free, right? They free the slaves, right? I don't have to agree with you, And I've always loved this about her because it's like going nuclear in the argument immediately. She's like, I am free, I can do what I want. That's what freedom means. I feel like practicing one's freedom is really, in fact, it's a moral responsibility. But I don't think that people who are under pressure of various kinds of health or finances are always fully free to do what they need to do. And if I have that freedom, I have to use it. And this is the way I express it. I try to have my senses open to what I want to do. I don't say this has to be the genre. I don't say I have to write it this way so that I can get paid for it. I don't say I have to do it this way so that, it satisfies such and such and such a person. I want the answer that my work is always given to be to the question, what would freedom look like in this situation? And so, and that is actually a very intentional and articulated thing to myself, where I say, what would it be like to be free in writing this? How do I make a leap to the next paragraph in a way that somebody might not have seen coming? Or if most people would have just written 2 paragraphs about this, how do I turn it into 3? Because somebody might say, oh, well, that gets too boring, but no, I'm free, And so the way I approach writing and photography is exactly the same that way. No plan ahead of time, but I mean, it's almost a quasi-spiritual thing for me, actually. It really is. It's like going like that, What does a city want to tell me? What does a scene want to tell me? Like sometimes even being in the scene and closing my eyes and feeling the scene and hearing the scene and only then opening my eyes and making an image, So that kind of hypersensitivity, which is not meant to sound precious, but which is the only way I know of getting to the work that annoys me a little less than the work that might annoy me a great deal. Okay, I think we have to stop there.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Thank you.
Just to reiterate that books are available in the lobby from Metropolis Books or up the back, and that Teju will also be signing books. And will you all please join me in thanking Teju Cole?
Thank you.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.